Hi loves, welcome back to my channel. Happy Halloween. I am so excited to be doing this video for you guys today. I have some really talented writers and I'm going to be reading some of their stories and I'm just so excited for this video. Before we get started, if you're new to my channel, welcome. I make new videos every single week and I have a ton of fun videos coming up for you guys, so subscribe and turn on the bell notifications so you don't miss a thing. I'm not sure how long this video is going to be. It might be a bit longer than what you guys are used to from me, so grab a drink, grab a snack, and get excited for these spooky stories. We're going to change the lights to orange and light a spooky black candle. So now that it's all spooky, let's get into the storytelling. I'm going to give a little disclaimer. I have a learning disability that makes it really hard for me to read, and I have been practicing reading. I've been reading Frankenstein. I finished The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes earlier this month, so I've been practicing reading this month, and I want to give these works the proper delivery that they deserve, so if I trip up on any words or this video is kind of choppy, that is why. Our first story comes from one of my good friends, Ria. She's so talented in everything she does. She sings, she writes, she draws. I just can't wait to read her story for you guys. She has a Tumblr and a Wattpad, and I will have those linked down below so you can go over there and show her some love. So yeah, let's get into her story. This story is called Trust Your Instincts. Gregory Mason finished his final sketch around 11 p.m. on Thursday evening. He set the ruler aside and stared at his project. It was an elementary school designed for a small town nearby. Gregory leaned back in his chair and it creaked under the added stress. He narrowed his eyes, wondering if he had added too many windows or not enough, before finally turning off the drawing table light and deciding he'd done enough for one day. He was the last one in the office, as he had wanted to finish the project by the end of the week, and it was cutting close to his deadline. He glanced at his watch, though he already knew from the black sky outside that it was well past the point his wife, Ellen, would have liked him to be home. She doesn't like having to put their daughter to bed without him. He knew that he may be in for another lecture on how important the first 5 years of a child's development are. It would be less than a year until Kara turned 5. He rubbed his eyes, already feeling too tired for the half-hour drive back to his house. Frequently, Kara would stay up and wait for him to get home if he wasn't there in time to tuck her in. It was this thought that motivated him to get up from his chair and start getting ready to leave. He pulled on his jacket and threw away his half-empty coffee cup that had long since gone cold. He left his office, shutting the door behind him, and began making his way down the hall towards the stairwell. Halfway down the hall, he realized he forgot his keycard and turned to go back and retrieve it. And then, he stopped. At the back of the building, where the cubicles were located, the lights were on. The lights are automatic, so this meant the motion sensor must have been triggered. Gregory had thought he was alone in the building, but he assumed someone had simply forgotten something and returned briefly to get it from their workstation while he had been too involved in his project to notice. He walked back to the office, retrieving the keycard from the top drawer of his desk. Then, he heard something, shuffling as though someone were dragging their feet across the carpet. Gregory is a logical man. He knew that it was likely just an intern and that there was no reason for him to feel so unnerved. Despite his reasoning, he felt the hair standing up on his neck, and his heart rate increased, as though his body was instinctively reacting to a danger he couldn't consciously perceive. He brushed off the thought, blaming it on the long workday and the lack of sleep. Despite this, as he left his office, he shut the door as quietly as possible. He mentally scolded himself, thinking it was ridiculous for him to be hiding from an imaginary predator. He decided he would go and check the back room, just to prove to himself that there was nothing wrong. He turned left down the hall towards the cubicles. By the time he had walked to the end of the hallway, he had convinced himself there would be nothing of interest for him to find. However, when he reached the room, his heart leapt into his throat. There, standing at the opposite wall, was a man. His back was turned towards Gregory, and although it wasn't possible to be sure, as there were several cubicles between them, he appeared to be unclothed. His hair was dark and ragged, and his skin was very pale. He had spots of dirt caked onto him as though he had been sleeping in the mud. He was shaking and seemed very unstable, as though he might fall over at any moment. Gregory's initial instinct was to run, as he had already been slightly paranoid before seeing the man. However, he did not act on it. He remained calm, telling himself to be rational. He assumed the man was troubled, perhaps homeless or mentally ill. Gregory thought he should talk to the man and then decide if it would be necessary to call the police. "Excuse me," Gregory said, but did not finish the sentence. As the man turned to face him, his head lolled to the side, as though his neck couldn't possibly support the weight of it. His movements were slow and lacking control. He kicked his legs out before taking each step to turn, dragging his feet across the floor to bring him close enough to support his body. This brought the image of a puppet on strings to Gregory's mind, and he felt a sudden jolt of fear through his chest. When the man turned around fully, Gregory could see his face perfectly under the fluorescent light, and his fear turned to panic. The man's skin was practically gray, and what had seemed to be mud now appeared closer to rot. The man's jaw hung open, and in his mouth a strange black liquid swirled around rapidly. His eyelids had been removed, and the sockets were rimmed with blood. His eyes did not sit inside the sockets, but behind them, as though they couldn't quite fit. They were bright orange, with thin black pupils slitted vertically down the center. For a moment, Gregory felt frozen. He couldn't process what he was seeing, and so he couldn't react. He just stood and stared, ice-cold dread filling his chest and closing his throat. Not that it would have helped him to scream. It wasn't until the creature took a step towards him, once again producing that long, dragging sound across the carpet, that Gregory was able to force his legs to move. He turned and fled down the hall, attempting to look both in front of him and behind him all at once. For how much difficulty the creature seemed to have with movement, by the time Gregory had reached the other end of the hall, it had already maneuvered its way across the cubicles and was chasing him with jerky, lopsided steps. Its feet twisted around the railing towards him, and Gregory wondered if the creature even had bones to support its limbs. This didn't seem to hinder it, as it dropped to the ground and launched itself down the hallway on all fours. Gregory's breath came in short gasps, each one producing a small, panicked shout. He could hear his heart pound in his ears as the creature somehow managed to gain speed, the black liquid audibly whirling in its throat. When he finally reached the door to the stairwell, Gregory twisted the knob and slammed the door so forcefully he fell forward onto the landing. He turned onto his back, seeing the creature sprinting at him, its eyes moving erratically behind the bloodied eye sockets, the black liquid swishing and whirling in and out of its mouth. Gregory kicked at the door. He missed twice and then hit it on the third time. It slammed shut, the lock setting automatically. He heard a loud thump as the creature failed to stop in time. Gregory scrambled to his feet, grabbing onto the stair railing for support. He started down, but when he reached the second landing, he heard a sound like running water and looked back up the stairs. Thick, black liquid was flooding out from under the door and began pouring down the stairs towards him. Gregory dashed down the second flight, leaping over the last 3 steps and just barely managing to get his footing as he landed. He crashed through the exit door into the parking lot and sprinted for his car. He cursed himself for parking so far back, no longer daring to look behind him. He didn't slow his pace until he reached the car, fumbling to get his key fob out and unlock it. The moment he sat down inside, he jammed the key into the ignition, slamming his foot on the accelerator before he'd even gotten into gear. Within seconds, he was out of the parking lot and making his way towards the freeway, not bothering to consider the speed limit. It wasn't until he was halfway home that his heart rate finally started to slow. His eyes darted repeatedly to the rearview mirror, although he didn't know how the creature could possibly follow him going 90 down the highway. He told himself that he needed to calm down. He didn't want to tell his wife what had happened. Even if he wanted to, he didn't think he could. By the time he reached his house, he had managed to get himself into the frame of mind to feign normalcy. He parked in the driveway and tried not to appear jumpy as he scanned the yard on his way to the front door, but he couldn't help looking over his shoulder. When he got inside, Ellen was on the couch in the living room. She stood as soon as she heard him enter. "Oh, Greg, thank God you're all right." She wrapped her arms around his neck, embracing him tightly before taking a step back and slapping his shoulder. "What kept you?" she demanded. "What do you mean?" he asked, hoping she wouldn't know how shaken he was. "You know I was at work." "Didn't you see the news?" she asked. Her eyes were wide. "No, why? What happened?" he asked, sitting down on the sofa. She sat next to him, twisting her hands anxiously. "A man was murdered, right by your office. Greg, it's absolutely horrible. The person that did this must have been completely deranged," she said. Gregory felt cold and balled his hands into fists to keep them from shaking. "By my office?" he asked. "Yes, and it was so awful." She covered her mouth with her hand. His whole body, everything had been pulled out. "Pulled out? What do you mean pulled out?" Gregory could feel the fear pricking his chest again. "Pulled out of his skin, and they don't know where it is. They found his insides just strewn around behind one of the buildings in town, less than a block away from where you were working." Her voice became strained. "And because they couldn't find his skin, they couldn't identify him yet, and you were so late getting home, I couldn't help but think—" She stifled a sob. "Elle, I'm right here, I'm fine." Gregory pulled her into his chest, hiding his fear behind the attempt to comfort her. His mind raced from the thought of how very close he was to being that man, how it could have been his skin the creature had been wearing next. He suppressed a shudder. After several long moments, Ellen had calmed down and decided to go to bed. Gregory assured her he'd be there in a moment, and went down the hall to their daughter's room. Her door was cracked so that just enough light could stream in from the hallway. She was asleep, as he expected, with a worn stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. Gregory sat down gently on her bed as he listened to the steadiness of her breathing as he finally began to feel a sense of relief. He would not be going back to the office the next day. He'd never go back if he could help it. He made the decision to put in a transfer request in the morning. Perhaps he'd even look for a new job entirely. Feeling slightly better after seeing his daughter sleeping soundly and having a plan sorted, he left Kara's room. Being sure to leave the door cracked slightly the way she liked it, he went to check that the house doors were locked before turning in. He checked the front door first, then the garage, and finally went to the sliding glass door in the back. He pulled the curtain aside, and seeing that the lock was set, he began pulling the curtain back into place when something caught his attention and his blood ran cold. Just outside their backyard fence, he could have sworn he saw a pair of orange eyes. Ooh, girl, that is scary. I think my favorite part about the story is the way she writes. The first time I read this, I literally could not stop reading. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and then when it was over, I like spam texted her because oh my gosh, the ending of this. She is just so talented, and again, I will leave all of her links down in the description box below so you can go over and show her some love. Our next story comes from Liz of Dragon Girl Liz, and she also posts amazing videos here on YouTube. She makes and sells the cutest little dragons. Her YouTube content is so creative and funny, and you guys should really go check her out. I will leave all of her links in the description box below as well. So let's get into her spooky story. This is one where you should probably close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just imagine you're there. It'll make it a whole lot spookier. This is called I Can See You. You're walking down a forest path. It's getting dark, but it's the time of night when it's just cool enough to need a jacket and the sky is an explosion of colors. Not for long though. The wind whistles and the eerie song through the leaves and the branches. You notice the dying sunlight through the bright fall leaves. The forest is beautiful this time of night. The stone bridge is crumbling. You feel adventurous, so you take the path across the broken stones and logs ahead. Leaves and twigs race each other down the rapids created by the path. You skip along, jumping from stone to log to stone, careful not to fall in the water. A branch snaps. You freeze mid-jump, almost falling into the rushing water, catching yourself on the overhanging branch. You leap to the safety of the opposite bank and continue on your way, glancing over your shoulder just once, not knowing what to expect, but dreading finding something. It's darker now, almost too dark. The symphony of nighttime sounds beneath you as you scurry down the path. The same eerie melody of the wind continues, louder this time. Something is off. You can just feel it. You pause, listening, taking in the sounds. Nothing. You shake your head and continue heading down the even darker path. The forest is pitch black now. Your eyes have adjusted to the darkness, but you still can't see a thing. You should be home at this point. Why aren't you? The sounds are getting louder and louder. You can't hear yourself think. Did you guys see it? I totally did reading this for the first time. The way she writes really makes you see it in your head if you like really close your eyes and listen to it. I just love it. Again, I will have both of our amazing authors' links in the description box below so you can go over there and show them some love. Huge thank you to Ria and Liz for letting me read your amazing stories. You guys are so talented and I just really enjoyed reading your writing. I hope you liked this Halloween video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel down below, and also turn on my bell notifications so you know when I post. Stay safe, stay healthy, make good choices, and I will see you guys next week. Happy Halloween. Bye guys.